Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements and damages for his clients. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are going to talk about traumatic brain injuries in personal injury cases and what victims and attorneys must know. Sagi, great to see you again as always.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, TBIs is one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's we've talked about it a little bit on the show, I think, and we've talked about how many different avenues there are. I think we've brought up football, obviously, any sort of accidents. So let's start by talking about an impactful statistic or a story. Do you have anything that you can share with us to kind of kick off this conversation?
I do. So I just pulled the stats from the CDC. So they collect data from hospitals across the country and from medical centers, and they address TBI data. So the stat that just threw me off and just is right out there is 69,473 TBI-related deaths in 2021. That's 190 people dying a day from TBI-related issues. Think about that. Those things are huge, about 586 TBI hospitalizations a day across the country. And this is only in the United States. So when we talk about TBI, traumatic brain injury, and concussions, these things are real. They happen a lot. And so whether you're an attorney or a client, you really need to be thinking about TBIs. If you have a TBI or if you're representing someone who has a TBI, think about how you can help them and what you need to know about these specific types of injuries.
What is the medical definition, and can you talk about maybe different types of TBIs?
So generally, we talk about a traumatic brain injury. They categorize them into basically three different types of categories. One is called mild, the other one is moderate, and severe. So usually you'll see an injury, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. Mild would be something where you're in a car accident, you're rear-ended, and you've heard of whiplash, where your head flies forward and backwards. It could be rear-ended, it could be a T-bone, it could be a fall down where your head is getting shaken up. The brain is shaken in the skull, or it's jolted in the skull. That can cause a mild traumatic brain injury. Where someone gets hit in the head, that can cause a mild traumatic brain injury. A more moderate brain injury would be where, again, you can have the shaking of the head. You can also have the hitting. Someone got hit, a gunshot wound. Those are more moderate, although those can be severe. And then there's a severe where you have someone who is, completely brain dead or has major ramifications from the injury where they're no longer able to function on their own or able to do things on their own. Those are the extremely severe injuries. The ones we're probably going to focus on here for this talk is the mild traumatic brain injury. And I use the word mild loosely because, it's only mild in the literature. It's not mild to the person experiencing it and the family members who have to deal with the person who has a mild traumatic brain injury. So there's still traumatic brain injuries. There's still real injuries that people have to deal with, address the consequences of them, and still try to get medical help.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're not talking about the spice level of food here. Mild is not mean nothing. It means it's still significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely life altering. Now, sometimes people can heal from it, and get better, but there's always ramifications later on in life. There's literature out there where people who have a mild traumatic brain injury sometimes don't see it till later on in life. What they call a neurodegenerative disease happens, like Alzheimer's or dementia. People, in another statistic, people who have a traumatic brain injury, whether it's a mild, moderate, or severe, are 2 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide, are more likely to develop dementia, are more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than the regular population who hasn't had a head injury. Mm-hmm. So these things are important. And when you're representing someone who has a traumatic brain injury, you need to get into those stats not just say, oh, they had an injury and they're fine. They're not fine. They may look normal, like you and I, Kevin, but what's going on in the brain and the long-term complications and issues that a person can have as a result of a TBI are horrendous. You just heard 3 things that are pretty bad, but it gets even worse.
And some of the impacts can be kind of almost hidden. Like they're not as obvious. Like we talked about, people in the hospital that might be brain dead or something like that. That's obviously very obvious. Can you talk about some of the cognitive, emotional, or physical effects that maybe that we don't necessarily see?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times you'll see a person with a mild traumatic brain injury, they'll have a processing issue, meaning they can see things, they see it visually perfectly fine, but it takes them a little while longer to process what's going on. So when you're talking to someone who has had a TBI, you may get frustrated with that person because why is it taking them so long to answer? Why can't they just spit out the answer right away? Maybe they can't process like they used to. Mm-hmm. So imagine you're in a city, and I've given a similar example, but I'll give you a different one. Imagine you're in a city and you need to get from point A to point B, from one part of the city to the other part of the city, but the roads that you need to take, the easy roads to get there or the straight roads, are all like, imagine an earthquake just happened and they're all ripped and you can't take those, they're crushed. You can't go through those roads because they're all destroyed. You have to go all the way around the entire city to get to that point. And that's what happens in the brain when someone has a processing issue, like a cognitive issue with that. Sometimes also you have issues with vision. So what you see and what processes are 2 different things. So you have people who have, they can't, sometimes tell with their peripheral vision what's going on. And so they may bump into things when they're walking, and they don't even know that's related to the traumatic brain injury. So there's certain experts like a neuro-optometrist or a neuro-ophthalmologist that can help a person who's dealing with that. Sometimes we have hearing issues where the person can't hear as well. Again, family members and friends could get frustrated because again, they're not getting answers right away. And maybe because the person can't process the sounds like they used to. They may need hearing aids. They may need more therapy. Also, when your hearing is off or when your sight is off, that can cause balance problems for people. So you can have people who stumble or people who bump into things. So there's a whole plethora of injuries that come from the brain, because the brain is, think of the brain like your CPU for the central processing system for a computer. When that goes down, the computer just doesn't work right. Or if a portion of the computer doesn't work right, the rest of it just doesn't flow well. It takes forever to upload stuff or download stuff or process stuff with the computer. The same thing goes on in the brain. The brain works a little bit slower, and hence the individual gets frustrated, especially when people are telling them that, they're a little slow, or people are getting frustrated with them. The individual can get frustrated, and that leads to depression as well, and a whole cascade of other items and issues from the traumatic brain injury.
We've talked before about, you remember getting my bell rung playing sports and stuff like that as a kid. And you definitely preach early intervention and getting things checked out and maybe erring on the side of caution. Can you kind of talk about the medical journey when it comes to a traumatic brain injury?
Yeah. So while I'm not a doctor, I would say if you've had your bell rung, or if you're unconscious at the scene, or feel dizzy or confused in a crash, whether it's with a truck or with a car, I would say, again, I'm not a doctor, I don't give medical advice, but I would say get to the hospital, go get your brain checked out, make sure there's no bleeding in the brain. I've had cases where they didn't go. We had one case, unfortunately, where the individual didn't go and he ended up passing away from bleeding in the brain, which could have been picked up at the hospital, and they could have done intervention. So early intervention is key. Also, understanding that you have a brain injury. And this is where the lawyers come in. If your lawyer understands brain injury, they'll be able to help you and guide you and let you know, hey, you have something going on here that needs to be looked at. We know from all our veterans that come back, they've had traumatic brain injuries, some of them from blasts, some of them from just injuries to the head, and how it affects them. We see that every single day. I think in the news, they talk about some of the veterans having TBI. So this is actually out there now. They're talking about it more. So if you have a TBI, go see the neurologist. let the neurologist know what's going on. And if you have any questions, we have a checklist that I like to go through with my clients to see if they fit the criteria. I'll go through some of the stuff. Have you had headaches, dizziness, confusion, agitated, irritated, hearing loss, vision loss, double vision, ringing in the ears, tinnitus? Those are some of the items. Now, the list we have is a lot longer. It's a laundry list of items. If you're an attorney or if you're a client and you want a copy of that list, I'll freely share it with you. But those are some of the things that we look for to see, does this person fit the criteria of a traumatic brain injury? And if they do, I surely want to get them to a neurologist and let the neurologist make the decision on what type of care and treatment the person needs and if the person has a traumatic brain injury. So early intervention is the key one for health, but also the key for the case too. You don't want to wait too long before you go see a doctor. It's not good for your health, not good for your case.
Speaking about the case, is it challenging to prove a TBI in court?
Yeah, so this is what they call the invisible injury. The person looks fine, right? They look like you and I. Everything looks normal, but what's going on in the head is not normal. Again, the connections that used to be there are no longer there. And it's not like you can call, if the power's out. We just did an episode on Florida Power and Light, but if the power's out, you just call them and they'll connect the power back on. In the brain, when the axons and neurons have a disconnect or there's a break over there, you can't repair them. That's a disconnect forever. So if, for example, it deals with the front part of the brain, you're dealing with the frontal lobe that, deals with emotional issues. You start seeing clients who have emotional issues. If it's the back part of the brain, you could deal with the vision. So it really depends on what part of the brain got impacted for us to know, where they need to be treated or how they need to be treated by a specific physician. But you really need to bring that to life. We talked about the invisible injury. If we don't bring that to life, the jury won't understand it. And if the jury doesn't understand it, you're not going to get fair compensation for your client's injuries. So, of course, the defense wants to confuse everything. You need to use demonstrative evidence. And what I mean by that is exhibits. You will need to show if you have an MRI of the brain, you show the MRI of the brain, you show where the deficits are. If you have a CT scan, if there's bleeding in the brain, you want to show that. There's other tests. The MRIs are not the only thing, or the CTs are not the only thing. You have different types of diagnostic tools that can be used, and you put them all together to show here's how the injury is. Now, once you have that, now you want to show how has that impacted the person. We know they have a brain injury because we have all the diagnostic tools showing it. Now, how has it impacted the person? Is it the processing speed? Can they not get along with people? Are they more to themselves? Are they fatigued? Do they have hearing loss? It just depends on every client is different. So every injury caused from the brain injury is different, but everybody will have something different. And then it's your job as the attorney to show the jury. It's a show and tell. You want to show the jury what your client went through, what they're going through, and how it's impacted their life.
Can you share a success story where a TBI victim received the justice that they deserved?
Sure, yeah, I have a bunch of them. One that comes to mind was a client of ours, pedestrian, hit. CT scans came back normal. MRIs did not come back normal. They did show he had an MRI with diffuse tensor imaging, and that basically is a more microscopic type of look at the brain. And it's pretty detailed, so it's hard to say in this short podcast what it is. But diffuse tensor imaging looks for these microscopic lesions in the brain. We were able to show those. And he didn't have your traditional signs and symptoms. He was a smart man. And in his case, he was like a mathematician. So he would be able to multiply 4 numbers times 4 numbers really faster than you can do it on a calculator. Sort of like what we talked about earlier when you divided the 67,000 by 365 and you got to the 190, right?
Yep.
He could do that off the top of his head. I can't do that. I don't claim I'm good on the calculator, though I can do it on the calculator, but he was able to do it in his head. And we were able to show that, hey, here's a man who used to be able to do numbers together, put them together, multiply them, divide them really fast. And he was just slow. Right now, he couldn't do it. So that was one little pointer that we had for his case. Another one was the fatigue. He never had fatigue issues his whole life, but they suddenly started finding him sleeping on the job. And we were able to talk to his coworkers and they give depositions. Hey, this guy's sleeping on the job. They took pictures of him sleeping on the job. So one person testified about him sleeping on the job and how they knew him for 20 years and never saw him sleeping on the job. And here he is after this traumatic brain injury. He's just fatigued. He doesn't have the energy anymore. And another example was, hey, he used to be able to do numbers off the top of his head and do invoices all the time without going to the calculator or without working on Excel. And here he is, he can't do it anymore. He can't pop out these numbers. So clearly he was impacted. Again, not like you would think someone in the hospital can't do anything, but it impacted him in a different way. And there were other things in his case. But that case, we were able to get resolved for a nice 7-figure number. And, every case is different, but that was one of the cases.
Can you sort of give us your advice on the essential steps for victims and families of victims when it comes to TBIs to protect their rights, but also just access resources to help their health?
Yeah. So number one, if you have a TBI, go see obviously get medical attention that you need. And if you don't know who to consult, speak to lawyers who specialize in TBI or your primary care physician. But if you have a case, you want to go to a lawyer who handles TBI cases. That's kind of what we do in our office. All the lawyers are, we're specialists on it. This is what we do. So I would start off with immediately go to the hospital, go see a neurologist who deals with brain injuries, who handles brain injuries, and that's their subspecialty. You want to get your issues addressed. If you're having eye issues, go see the neuro-optometrist or neuro-ophthalmologist, not just a regular optometrist. Remember, regular optometrists will deal with getting your glasses and that kind of stuff. You want to deal with someone who deals with the brain and eyes. Same thing with hearing. If you're having hearing issues, audiologist. But really, it'll start off with the neurologist so they can help you get better, especially if you see or have family members telling you there's something off. Go get that examined. So number one, take care of your health. Number two, see a lawyer that knows what they're doing. We're here to help if you have any questions.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, visit shakedlaw.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Sagi, it's always great to see you. Thanks so much for sharing all your insights on TBIs and helping us kind of understand what these are.
Likewise. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.